Hello Internet. Today I wanted to start a new project. I want to look at Unity Highscores. Specifically, we're going to be looking at like online Highscores and how to set all of that up. So this is going to be kind of a combination of work in Unity. I think that's sort of the game engine we're going to target first. And then all of the other things that are required to actually run an online Highscore thing. So there's a database required so we can actually persist all of our stuff. And there's a lot of choices for what kind of database we'll use. We could just store a file on our server, or we could actually run any kind of database we want. We could run MongoDB, or we could run Postgres, or we could run MySQL, or we can pick pretty much whatever we want. And they're going to have different trade-offs depending on what we pick. And then the next thing we're going to be figuring out is what language we're going to write the server in. We don't have to choose C#. We could write it in Java and use Spring. We could write it in Go. We could use Python. We kind of have it like wide open to us. And so there's a lot of different choices that we can make. I'm probably going to do this twice. The first time I kind of want to run through this really quick and make not necessarily the best choices, but just make choices and kind of figure out what this actually looks like when we're done. Sort of build an MVP that's end to end. And then after that, we can kind of step back and take a look at the impact that those choices would have after we've built this thing. And so like how do those branching paths lead us to different results? So we have nothing. We don't have anything right now. We actually are in our Minecraft project. So this is a Minecraft server that's open. And there's a bunch of config stuff everywhere. I have this new folder. It's called Unity Highscores. There's nothing in it. I literally just created it. You can see the commands right there. And so the first thing we want to do is start up source control. So I'm going to create a local Git repo. This isn't on GitHub. This isn't anywhere. This is just a local Git repo for me. And that means that changes that I make in this repository can be committed to my local repository. And then later I can upload them. And all of those changes will still be reflected in that remote repository. So it gives me sort of a nice way to work on a project under source control without having to have my GitHub created or anything like that. The next thing, if I can remember how to do this, is we're going to need a new .NET project. I'm going to do this in C#, just so we're using C# both in Unity and in on our server. I think that makes the most sense. So we're just going to take a empty ASP.NET Core app. So we need to call this web. So how does this work? .NET new web. With a name of Unity. Let's do Highscore server C#. I'm giving it the language name here because there's going to be multiple projects here that are going to be using those different languages. And so this way we can differentiate them. Otherwise, I would leave off the name of the language because that's kind of redundant. You're going to be able to tell once you look in this folder what's there. This is just as like because we're doing a tutorial series, this is what we have to do. So I should probably talk about what I want to do in this specific video. We're not going to finish the whole thing in this one video. There's a lot to cover. And so really what I want to get done is get the API endpoints set up. So I want to be able to add a new Highscore, update a Highscore, and list the Highscores. Those are the three things. We're not going to save it. We're not going to really integrate this into Unity. We're not going to do any of that. Specifically, there's just going to be those three endpoints. I don't even remember what they were. I think it was post, delete, and list, and get. So those are really the three that we care about. And once we have those, a lot of the other things can kind of happen in any order we want. At that point, we should be able to integrate it into Unity if we wanted to, or we could set up a database if we wanted to, or we could do both of those simultaneously with two different developers working on it. There's no real distinction that has to happen there because we already have our contract, which is going to be our API. So once we get that sorted out, everything else kind of falls into place. So that's what we're going to hopefully get done right now. So if I list out, we have this new directory here. What I want is actually to work on this in Visual Studio Code, which I have open. We're actually in the terminal right now. And so if you actually do code-r and just this period, which is going to be the current directory, that's actually telling code to reuse the window and open the current directory, whatever that command or whatever that period is, open that in the current window of Visual Studio Code. So you'll see everything is going to go away. And now we have our project here, and it's all set up for us. And so it's been a while since I've worked with .NET Core, but we should be able to just open a terminal now and do a .NET build. We actually need to be in our project. So we'll navigate into that and do a .NET build. And that will actually get us building our project. And you can see it compiles successfully, which is good. We haven't made any changes, so it's good that nothing's broken. We have two files here. We have startup. I should make this a little smaller so you can actually tell what's going on. And we have program. The startup is sort of like your configuration stuff. If you're doing dependency injection stuff, that's going to happen here. And then the program is actually what is going to do stuff. I am missing a bit. This template doesn't have everything that I wanted it to. Well then, we may need to look up something because this isn't quite what I want. There's three things here that we want. We want this startup, which is going to do all the configuration. Like I said, it's going to be dependency injection and things like that. Oh, that's okay. It really is like bare bones. What this is going to do is when we start up this web server, it's going to write out hello world to it. Okay, they've made this even simpler. The program is actually what's telling us what to do. This is actually the entry point for your web server, I guess, in this case. So main, if you've written a console app, it's the same thing. They're just using this to inject everything there. And then this ends up getting passed to the startup function. The third thing we needed was a controller, which we don't have here. And so controllers are sort of what actually does things in your web service. They define the endpoints. And so you would have a controller and it would have specific functions that are open, and those functions are going to have specific contracts. So they're going to have specific things that they're going to expect. And based off of that, they're going to return some specific results. And so we need to write 3 of those, and I need to figure out how to create a new controller. And I don't think there's any easy way to do that, at least not that I'm aware of. Controller, yeah. We don't have like a quick and easy way to do that, so I'm going to go and look that up, and then we'll pick back up once I figure that out. All right, so things are a little bit cramped here, but this is sort of what a controller will look like here. They have a really basic example. You can actually add some annotations to these, so they actually define a little bit more about what's actually going on. In this case, they're not doing that. And so we'll see what we need, but we want to create some sort of controllers folder, like that. And we want this to be our Highscore controller. There we go. And so we're going to put this, ooh, that's a little bit much for typing. Let's just copy something else and actually add our .cs to the end of this so it actually knows it's a C# file. That might be why we didn't get any help there. But let's do Highscore controller, and that's going to extend the controller class. And we should be able to import that there. It's already in this gross namespace. Because we use dashes in the project name, it put underscores in there. We can remove those later, but for now it shouldn't be that big of a deal. It's just not nice and kind of an anti-pattern. Not really, it's not bad in any way. It's not going to change anything. It's just nobody else is doing that. And so your project is going to stand out if you have these underscores in there. Let's see here. We have the main and everything else. So really, we have everything we needed from this example. The only other thing that they're really doing is creating these functions. And so if you do index, it goes to the name of the controller. So in our case, it would be Highscore. So it would be like localhost/Highscore. If you actually name it something other than index, it's going to actually add on to that path. So it would be whatever, and then the name of the function. And that's pretty much all we need to know from there, I think. This project is also, it's been a while since I've worked with ASP.NET, so we're going to pick it back up as part of this as well. Part of the motivation here for doing it all like this. So let's do void string. I actually completely forgot. Public string index. Cool. All right. And then public, or what am I doing? Let's return hello world. And so if we go to this /highscore endpoint, we should hopefully see that come back and actually get a response. So I'm going to split my shell here, and this way we'll have two different things that we can do. And what I want to do is .NET run to actually run this. I don't think there's anything else we actually need here. This is going to have a compile error. Invalid operation. Why is it trying to do SSL? Okay, this is weird. Oh, okay. I'm gonna copy that, but also it's trying to use SSL. That must be a default now. So by default, it must be trying to use SSL. And that's just going to be, if you've ever seen secure in the little top part of your browser, that means it's using SSL certificates. So it's actually encrypting, and the server actually has a way of telling whether to trust or not trust whoever encrypted that. And it's sort of a way of verifying who's sending what. So that is going to generate our developer certificate so that we actually have something to use. And now if I run this, hopefully we don't get that error again. There we go. And now you can see we're running on two different ports. Because we're using SSL, we actually have the secure one, and then we also have an insecure one. So we should be able to hit either of those. If we hit this secure version without having anything secure, without like using the cert that I was just talking about, we're probably going to hit errors. So there's that. I think it might do redirection. It's been a while, like I said, so we'll see. But so what I should be able to do, actually, I would expect to see that hello world right here. I don't know why we don't see that. That's kind of interesting. But let's do HTTP :localhost port 5000. If we hit that, we can see that we hit everything else over here. And actually there is our response right here. In our content, we get hello world back. And so this is just always going to respond with hello world. That might cause problems because what we want to do is actually hit high scores. And we get something else back. Another hello world. We actually called it the high score controller. So if I do high score, we get hello world again. Yeah, this is not what we want. We don't want this to constantly return the same thing over and over and over again. Ideally, it would return something else. So if I drop this, I'm curious what will happen. I should also point out there are other templates. So if I do .NET new help, we'll actually see a few other ASP.NET Core things here. Those ones are going to actually have these controllers already set up for you, so you don't need to do what I'm doing. Actually, Web API. We wanted Web API. Should we go back and do that? We haven't done much. Let's do that. I guess we're learning on the fly here, but I can actually do this and do high score server C#. Doesn't know what RF is. That's fine. Yes. All right. So that project's gone. That was nice. Making mistakes, but learning on the way. Web API. I believe there was a hyphen there. It'll error out if there wasn't one. So there wasn't. So let's do Web API. There we go. And now we actually connect back to all of our stuff, and we have this controllers here. In this case, we have the values, and you can see there's those annotations. So we've gotten back to sort of what we want with a little bit more added. Unresolved dependencies, that should be fine. So let's go back in Highscore server C# and do .NET run. So this is going to run our server again, and we should see different results now, and we should be able to hit the value endpoint. In this case, they've modified the endpoint. Instead of doing like /highscore, it would actually be /API or API/blah, because they've specified the route up top. And so you can kind of modify things. We're still on port 5000, so if I just hit that empty endpoint, we get an error. Connection refused, could not establish SSL trust. Uh-oh. That's not the right error. So let's see here. If can we hit? Nope. All right. We may have issues with curl with this. Because like you can see the connections are going through. We're actually hitting this, but we're erroring out. And part of that should be in this startup right here. So I think we can take this off. This use HTTPS redirection, that's actually going to be sending us to the secure endpoint. And with curl, we aren't validating the cert at all. And so that's going to cause some issues. So if I do .NET run again, I should talk about this. Curl is just doing a web request. It's like going into your web browser and typing this address in. It's just doing it from the command line. And it sort of gives us an easy way to do this. All right, never mind. Yeah, okay, this is the right error. So we get a 404 here, which means it couldn't find an endpoint at this specific thing. And that usually means we're not pointing at the right thing, because we aren't. We're pointing at the top level of this web server, and we actually wanted to point at one of these API endpoints, which is going to be at API/values. And so if I do just this and don't do anything else, we're going to be performing this get against this action endpoint. So we should get 2 values back in an array. And so we get a success, and we get an array back with the 2 values. And so this is working. We can also give it an ID. And so I think I might be doing this wrong. I think what this is saying, yeah, it has a comment there. So we can give it an ID in this case. And if I give it like 100, that's saying get me the ID at 1, or the 100th ID, or the 100th user, or whatever. In this case, we're getting the 100th value. And so we just get back our value here, like we're expecting. So we've hit these 2 endpoints at that point. And then posts and puts are actually going to be either pushing things. So in the case of a post, it's like a new thing. You're introducing something new into your database. With a put, typically they're used for like updates, but some people will use them however they want. I personally use puts a lot less than I use posts, but that's just because of the nature of what I've been working on. And then delete things, and so there's a specific endpoint for that. And we should be able to do that with curl as well. We're probably going to want something to actually work with this a little bit nicer. And I think we can probably split each of these endpoints into their own separate thing. I think that might make a little bit more sense. So instead of doing all 3 of them in the same video, we might just focus on this get at first, and then do the put, or the post, to create the new value, and then the delete to remove the Highscore value. I think those are the 3 we need. And so we actually don't need this values controller, but we don't need to delete it either. Instead, we can modify it and do Highscores controller and effectively repurpose this. And so we can rename this to, not doing that, to Highscores controller. We have our get, which is going to be exactly what we want. It's going to return an innumerable set of strings. We have this other get, which would be for the specific player. And then we have these posts, puts, and deletes. I am going to comment those out because we're not going to use them right now. And so when we're talking about this high scores, effectively, it's going to be a key value pair of a user who is going to have some unique string for their name and a value, which is going to be the high score. You can modify this and store whatever you want in here. Your database tables and whatever are just going to get a little bit more complicated. And depending on what you choose for your database, that might actually not be that big of a deal. We need some place to store this. For now, we're just testing this, and we don't really care. So we can do a private static. What do we want? We want a dictionary of strings and values. For high scores, we can store whatever we want, really, as the value. I was just kind of talking about that. But for me, I'm going to store an int. And then we want to call this our high scores. Equals a new dictionary, blah. And so the advantage of making this static is it's only going to get initialized once. One of the quirks, or I guess nice things of ASP.NET is every time we are calling this controller, it's actually recreating itself. And so if we made this as a private field of this, this would always be empty. There would never be anything in it because we'd always be recreating it. And so if we ever tried to modify it, it would actually get reset. With this, I believe we should be fine. We're doing gets anyway, so it doesn't really matter. We just need something to pull the results from. And so we're going to use a dictionary initializer, which is done with these double brackets. The first one sort of creates the initializer, and then the second set of brackets is a key value pair. And so in this case, we're going to have like world of 0, and we're working with ints, so we can set it to like 42. And we can set something else like Minecraft. That's a pretty good game. So we'll do 9001. And we can just kind of keep going on. Let's see, I'm playing some Halo recently, so let's do that and set it to like 500. Sure, why not? And we get some values. And so that should be all we need in order to get our high scores working. So we have this, effectively our set of high scores. Eventually, this is not going to exist. This isn't online high scores at this point. This is just a web service that's going to return static values. And that's not very useful. There's some uses for that. But really, in our case, it's not going to do what we want. But for testing purposes, it will actually be nice because this dictionary is going to be very similar to what we're actually going to be storing in the end on our database. We're going to have a set of people, and we're going to need to be able to look up a score. And that's exactly what a dictionary does. And so by kind of modeling this in memory, it gives us a way to kind of work with the same data structures and work with the same flow without having to implement a database already. And so that's one of the advantages. Right now, it returns an enumerable set of strings. We don't really want that. We can actually just do a I dictionary, I think, and return an abstract version of a dictionary, which is going to have the same style that our original dictionary does. The reason we don't use just an explicit dictionary here is so if we want to implement it with something else, we're not bound to that. Effectively, what we're saying is we're going to return a set of key value pairs. How that's formatted and all the underlying data structures is not really relevant. And so we're not going to include that here. And then in this case, we should just be able to return the set of high scores. This works for now, but it actually is not probably the best solution. What we're going to run into is we're going to have way too many results. If millions of people play this, we're going to end up returning millions of results. And that's going to be like megabytes of data that you're going to be returning for a single, what is the top 10 player thing. And so we probably don't want that. And so what I'm actually going to do is I think this works. It's been a while. I'm going to introduce an optional parameter. And I'm going to call this the page limit and set it equal to 50. We're not going to use it yet. But I just kind of want it there as a way for us to see what we're getting back. And so this way we could go back and limit the number of high scores that we're going to print out using that page limit. So the default will be 50. It will print the first 50 results, or however we program this. But if we provide one, we can change that to whatever we want. There's some other concerns there with allowing the clients to request how many things they want, because you could have somebody who really wants to like take your service down for whatever reason, start sending in requests for millions and millions of records, and do that a lot, and suddenly you'll get all of those requests. We're not going to cover how to mitigate that, because it's not something that I'm super familiar with, and yeah, it's not. It would be something that you'd want to go and research, because there's a few ways you could deal with it, and I don't know the best way, and maybe we'll get into it, but I don't have plans for that. So anyway, there's our results. Instead of this ID, we're going to pass in a string. That's not right. Whoa. Get string. All right, cool. There's a problem here. We have spaces, and so we're going to actually need to encode these in order to get the results. We would need to encode that, because otherwise we're going to have spaces in our URL, and that doesn't actually work. And so this sort of gives us a way to test that and explore that. You could use IDs for your users, and so have like a set of users tied to IDs, and have those IDs tied to high scores. And then you kind of have a distinguishment between people's names and their high scores. The advantage of doing it that way is if anybody ever wants to change their username, they don't lose all their high scores. We're not doing that right now. But there isn't actually really any distinction. This is just a random string, right? So you could plug in anything you wanted. If you wanted this to be some weird GUID or whatever, go for it. There's not going to be anything that's going to stop you here. And so we have this action result. We're doing a string. And so we just need to return that value. In this case, what's the best way to do this? We could just return the value, but the problem with just returning the value is then you need to know what the parameter of the call was. And so sometimes it can be handy, even though you know, like we passed in the ID, why do we need to pass the ID back? Sometimes that's still handy because it will actually give you that information about what was happening and the context of the original request. So I think there's a key value pair that we could use. And so this would hold our string and our high score. And so all we would need to do is do a new key value pair of strings and ints and give it the ID. And then we need to actually look up this high score. So we're going to do high scores and give it the ID. This breaks if the ID isn't there. And so we need some sort of safety here to make sure that it was there. And we can actually do that doing if highscores.hasKey dot key contains key, there we go, of ID. And so we want to make sure that that's actually going to exist. Otherwise, we want to return action results. How do we do this? We want to return a new not found exception, not found result. I think that's how you do that. So we should get a 404 effectively when we try to retrieve the high score for a player that doesn't exist. And that prevents us from getting errors in this, but also gives a useful result if this doesn't work. Does this have... Okay, there's no way to add context, it doesn't look like. Yeah, so we just have a status code. So we can't say like the user didn't exist or something like that. And that's fine for now, but we might want to modify that just to depending. That's more of a usability thing, I guess. It shouldn't be that big of a deal. Anyway, this should be done at this point. We don't have the pagination going, but this endpoint at least should work. And we should be able to get that list as well. And so if I run this, everything compiles correctly. And so if I try to hit that values endpoint again, we get a 404. Doesn't exist anymore because we deleted it. But if I go to Highscores, Highscores, and do 100, we also should get a 404. No, we crashed. Given key was not present in the dictionary. Oh, wait. Oh, this is wrong. We needed a not there. I was checking if the key exists, I was going to return not found, and that's not right. If the key doesn't exist, we want to return not found, and then otherwise we're going to do that. That makes much more sense. Okay. Cool. Let's restart this. I could be using .NET Watch, but we're not. All right, so if I run this now, we get a 404. And you can see the 404 here, and we also get it here. So the left side is going to be what our server is doing, and the right side is what the client would see. So in this case, they're both doing 404s. But if we do, say, Minecraft, we get a valid response. And the key is Minecraft, and the value is 901, which matches our dictionary. So that one seems to be working. And if we plug in something else, like say Halo, we are going to get 500, which is what we want. So that seems to be working just fine. And now, if we were to go and just remove that value there, we should see our full list of World of Zero, Minecraft, and Halo with their respective scores. So you effectively just pulled and got that dictionary. And we should see somewhere in here. I don't actually know if this writes out to the console. I don't think it does. Yeah, it doesn't look like it. So let's stick a breakpoint in there and create a debugger. All right. So what we need to do in order to create the debugger is create something that can actually launch our debugger. So we're going to do configured for .NET Core. You can see it's set up with the Highscore server C#. This massive program here is just the compiled bit. So this is actually the artifact, the DLL, that we get out of compiling all of this. And there's a whole bunch of other configuration stuff. But what this is actually going to let us do is run this. So up here it's doing a .NET Core launch, which is actually the name of this task that we created. And so if I run this, we're going to get a second version of our server. That's not going to work, is it? Yeah, that's not going to work at all. So we get an IO exception because I tried to run 2 of our web servers, so we can't do that. So what I need to go do is actually go back here and get rid of that. And that, we don't need that. But we can actually kill this server. And so if we get rid of this, we should be able to start our debugger, which should have a breakpoint right here. And this is going to let us see that page limit. And so we provide the page limit as sort of a parameter here. Hi. SSL errors. Again? This is the most annoying thing. I think it's fine. We're gonna see, but I think we might be all right. Yeah. So everything's running. Those SSL errors are not something we need to worry about right now. But we get the default page limit of 50 when we just run this. So that's working. So I can just step over this. And now if I do that curl again and do question mark page limit equals, let's say 100. So we want twice as many results. If I run this now, we get 100 here, and you can actually see the page limit up in the variables tab also says 100. So we actually have a way to kind of configure this page limit. If we wanted to, and this is probably a good idea, we can set the max. So we can do page, not like that. We can do like math.max of page limit and, or min, sorry. So we plug in the minimum here. We're going to get the lowest value. So if we wanted somebody to be able to only retrieve the top 1,000 results and nothing else, we would do this. And that didn't work. Why is it doing bytes? Okay, that's weird. Okay, that's odd. This is what we need. We need to give it the value, because otherwise we're giving it this unknown thing, which we don't want. And so by doing it this way, we actually are telling it what value to use. And so this way we could actually limit our page limit. So if I were to restart this web server, we should go and get a bunch of those. I don't know why it opens this. I think those SSL errors are because we're trying to open the secure client and it's failing for whatever reason. That isn't something that I want to dig into right now, because that's a separate problem. But if we go here and I try to give it, say, 2,000, that's above our minimum. And so it's going to actually clamp this back down to 1,000. And so that gives us a way to kind of make sure this stays sane. And I think that's mostly everything we need. The final thing is just actually limiting these high scores. And so what I typically like to do is actually copy my data structure. So instead of doing something like take 50 or something, I don't even know if this works on a dictionary. It doesn't look like it does. But you could do something like this and do key. There's a way to get the contents. I don't remember what it is. Keys and values. There's also a key value something. But anyway, you could just take 50, which is going to take the first 50 things. I don't like doing that. I much prefer to actually just iterate over this and find things like this. There's a few problems with the way we've designed this currently. One of the big ones is we are keying off of the name, which means if we want to find the top 100 scores, we actually need to sort this and figure that out. And right now we don't have a way to do that. So we could have a separate thing that was keyed based off or sorted based off of these scores and had a mapping back to the back to our names. And that gives us sort of a directional mapping. That might be a little bit more useful for a high scores list. But if you want to find the top score or the score for a specific person or for a specific event or something, this gives us that. And so really, at this point, we kind of need to know what we're using this for. And we don't. At least not yet. For me, I'm picturing a high scores list, which means we want the top scores and compare that to your score. In this case, you should probably already know your score. And so it's less useful for you to actually have your score in there. But in this case, I think we're just going to take the first however many things. And then that algorithm figuring that out can be a separate project that we come back to when we have a little bit more time and a little bit more idea of where we want to drive that. Because right now, it's still sort of up in the air. So instead of returning high scores, let's do a new dictionary. So var high score results equals a new dictionary of our string and our int. And so we're effectively just creating this new temporary structure that we're going to use to return the results. And so instead of returning high scores here, we want to return high score results. And this gives us a way to kind of redefine and remodify this. And so the advantage of doing this instead of returning your high scores is that if you bind the results of your API to the data that you're storing, you can't change one without changing the other. Whereas if we actually separate these like I'm doing right now, at this point, after this line, we have effectively separated the data that we're storing from what we're going to return. And so if we ever need to like store additional information like the time of day or things like that, we can do that without actually returning additional information in our API and effectively breaking our contract and affecting everybody that's actually requiring that. Or if we want to return additional information here, like actually start injecting like when the request was made. So as of today at 7:13 p.m., here are the high scores. Maybe you want to return that. And at that point, you can't really do that because you've kind of tied yourself to this. And so we're kind of breaking that connection here. All right, so high score results, we're doing this. What I'm going to do is iterate over the keys and take the first 50. So for each var key in our high score keys, we want to take the first 50. So we're just going to do that, take 50. And then for this, we can just do high score results.add, and we want to add that key with the high scores key and just look up the value for that key. And so this should be a way to kind of duplicate this in a limited fashion. And so if I were to run this now, we don't need to actually run the debugger anymore. I don't think, famous last words. But if I run this, we can give it the page limit of 2000. That shouldn't break because we should get limited to 2000. And I actually didn't want to plug in 50 there. I wanted to use the page limit, but we can fix that. But if I run this, everything works and we get all three results. We don't overflow because we just took 50. And so in this case, it tried to take 50, saw there were only 3, and so it just was like 3 is all you're going to get. And so effectively what this is doing link and taking the enumerable set of keys in our dictionary, iterating over that until it's either reached the end of that list or it's hit 50, whichever comes first. In this case, we hit 3 first. But if I go back here and hit 2, we should get World of Zero in Minecraft and not Halo in the results. I can't change it because it's set here. So let's do page limit and restart this. Why doesn't it like that? Dot value. And I don't think I actually need that. I think we'll be fine without using the nullable type because I think we can still not provide it. So I'm going to try this again. And I might end up eating my words. It's been a few months since I've built a new ASP.NET server, if it's not not obvious at this point. But at this point, we get our 2 results. We get World of Zero and we get Minecraft. But we don't have Halo in there anymore. So if I go back and delete this, so we don't have a limit anymore, we're just saying get all the results, we should get all 3 again because we had a limit of 50. And so this way we can kind of tune that and get back our results. We can change this algorithm to do whatever we want. If we wanted to like sort by values, for example, we could do that as well. It's a little bit more complicated, but like in this case, we could iterate over the keys and then do order by probably descending. So we'll take the top score first and then order back from that. Plug in the key and do a high score results of key and do something like that. And so in this case, we should have, if we only did 1, we would get Minecraft first. This is going to be very slow because again, we're doing a sort and we probably don't want to do that with millions of results. We'd be doing that sort over and over again. And we don't actually need to do that. But for now, as like an example, this gives us a way to kind of do some of the most basic things that we need to do with this. So if I run this again, we get an error because our server crashed. The given key world of oh, I'm looking at the results. There we go. that should fix it. I was looking at, we have two different dictionaries, and I was looking at this one, which has nothing in it, and trying to get the keys out of it. And that's just not going to work. So we should be able to restart this and try that again. And we should actually get our results, but they should probably be, reordered. So now we have Minecraft first, and then Halo, and then World of Zero at the end. And so if we run this again and do like a page limit equal to 1, we shouldn't get World of Zero, but we should get Minecraft. That should be the first result, and that's what we get. And so that's sort of a way to get the top score. This is a very slow algorithm, though. I do not recommend you use this for anything that's expected to get big. For most people, though, this should probably be all you would need. Unless you're having like hundreds of thousands or millions of users, this probably isn't that big of a deal. But you kind of have to figure that out for yourself. We'll fix this later. Once we have a database, we can actually do some other things to get around this. But for now, as like an example, sure, we're good. And that is our gets mostly worked out. And so the next things we need to do are going to be this post, so we can actually inject new things into our database, and this delete, so we can actually pull scores off for players, whether they want to delete their information, or whether an admin needs to go in and say this person cheated and they don't have a score anymore. Whatever you want. Those are the two next steps. But for now, I think I'll leave it here. If there are directions that you want to see this, or like things that you think I might overlook, or other things like that, it would be great to hear those in the comments, or ping me on Discord in our Discord channel or something. This is probably going to be a project that could go in a whole bunch of different ways, and there's a lot of different like unique things that people may want or may not want. And so depending on your use case, we can kind of tweak towards that. We'll see. But I think that's mostly it. So if you like the video, consider giving it a like, and subscribe if you want to see more like this, especially if you want to stay up with this series. And yeah, I think that's mostly it. The final thing is, like, if you haven't noticed, I've been gone for on and off for like a few months now. Kind of just been busy with other things. Ended up moving and like switching jobs and doing a bunch of other things. So getting back into things and trying to pick it back up. Hopefully this year we can get a little bit more done. But yeah, still figuring that out. But anyway, that's it for now. So until next video, see you, Internet.